along to start the roadshow off?
Start the roadshow. I did bring some things along. I thought it might be an idea.
Yeah. did anyone bring anything along that they want John to have a look at and give you some more detailed evaluation? No, that's why John brought along a few items. Thank you, John. Mr. John.
You want me to start, do you? I can usually manage without it, but I'm quite happy to use the camera and everything else that goes with it, because do you want me to start the show rolling, or is somebody bringing something up? Oh, that's from Roger.
Ah, right. Yeah, we do have something.
Oh, well, I never. Caroline's the first to comment on this as much as anything. Some information on the back of it.
I need my glasses, sorry.
Very rare thing, Roger, I would suggest.
Oh, thank you, I need glasses.
Did anyone else bring anything along? Hands up, just so we know how much we'll be looking at today.
Have here a very rare item. I mean, Caroline's got most of Alfred's bits and pieces. This one obviously escaped at some time or other, and it is we've got a camera somewhere. There's a camera there.
It's there, John. Yeah, that's it.
What you have is a pencil sketch, a draft for a cartoon that eventually appeared in Bystander in 1923. This is dated 1922, and was probably a draft for that finished drawing. Not too much of his early work escaped. Caroline's got it all safely locked away, I'm pleased to say, which is a relief. And this piece I know, I have some knowledge of, because Roger got it from me. And I bought it from a bookshop in Hastings who found it inside a book. They contacted me and said, "Are you interested in Bestall artwork?" And I said, "Oh yes, please." And I travelled all the way to Hastings and was offered this and purchased it. And I've had it for about 30 odd years, and because Roger's such a nice guy, I've decided to pass it on to him, because I was doing nothing with it. But it is a very rare item. As I say, nothing much has escaped from Caroline's records, and no more they should, and that's really where it belongs. And if Roger's permission, I'll give it to her to put that there. No? Right, we'll pass on that then. Am I still batting?
Yeah, John, it looks like, other than the very exciting annual that we're all going to see in a minute, we're going to go through your items.
Oh, right. Nobody else has got anything to show?
I think most of this you would be able to hold down your sunflower archive. I don't know if people were talking.
Sorry, what are we talking about?
No, I think most of us assumed that you would be able to fill a lot of time with your...
Well, yeah, I can talk forever. They'll all be falling asleep if I'm going on this. I mean, I didn't know what was coming along. In roadshows in the past, people have rushed up here with things that are so common, you have to make a nice story about it. Like Rupert dominoes, you have to tell them they're wonderfully rare and everything else. You can buy about 6 copies or 6 lots down on the stall. Right, I will carry on then with my bits and pieces, and one of the interesting things, we start at the beginning, I suppose, is probably the best thing. And one of the first things that ever appeared as a competition was in Mary Tortel's day, was the embroidery contest. I think the camera can pick it up. Yeah. Oh, that's what they're seeing. And what it was just bear with me a minute, was a card, and you were supposed to use your skills of embroidery to make the picture look rather nice, something like that, which is a finished one that I also have, and you sent it off and you could win vast sums of money. I think it said 100 penny prizes, and the first prize was £10. I mean, the competition finished on August the 31st, 1921. Well, as Rupert appeared in November 1920, was it? Oh, it was, so we've got some experts out there who know that. Then this appeared probably a few months after Rupert first appeared in the newspaper. So it was an early competition, which presumably, I don't know who the winners were, I know it wasn't me, I wasn't around at the time. But obviously somebody has completed it and not sent it off, so they obviously didn't win anything. But they are quite scarce items to find. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have an untouched one and a rather well done one, so that's quite reassuring and a pleasure to have and a joy to behold, as you just found out. Mary Tortel did a lot of Rupert books, non-Rupert books, before she got involved in Rupert. She was an established artist of children's stories, as you probably know. I mean, I've written about it often enough in the newsletter and other places. And she used to draw little animals and everything else. She did the horse book and also the 3 foxes. And she was very good at animals. But one of the rarer items, and you don't see many around, not as, I don't know whether there are other examples in this format, but this is what's known as a matchbox book. Camera, there we are. It's very much like a Brian from May matchbox, and it opens up, and inside are the Mary Tortel pictures for, in this instance, John Gilpin. And it's unusual, and as I say, they're rather rare items. I don't know too many others around. In fact, I don't know of any around, so that narrows the field a bit. But she did a number of early stories before she got involved in, which also did postcards, of course, and was quite a prolific artist before her husband sorted her out to draw Rupert and Margot the Midget and all the others. And in those early days, her books were sometimes plagiarised. The Yanks are very good at that. They'll pinch anything. And here's an example. It's called The Strange Adventures of Billy Bunny. And it's a copy of one of the books that she's produced. They do credit her with the authorship and everything else. And it's in the same style as the stick books that appeared. You know, they use the illustrations, they just copied the lot without any regard. And this was published by a firm called M.A. Donahue in Chicago. I mean, eventually she and the Express suddenly got wise to it and decided to put copyrights on their things, and that stopped their little game from going too much further. But you do occasionally find these rogue editions turning up, which is quite nice. Now, of course, the original first editions of Mary Tortel's stories were in the newspaper. You know, so if you want a true first edition, the thing to do is to get the newspaper cutting. And here's an example of Rupert in Dreamland, obviously made up by some proud father and stuck in a little book for his child. And usually they encourage them to colour them in, so it saved them buying a colouring book for their child. This one obviously I didn't have any crayons because they're all clean and bright inside. But it is the complete story of 60. And Rupert in Dreamland itself is quite a, how shall I say, iconic book in the Little Bear series, because Rupert in Dreamland, one of the 6 Little Bear series books, is as scarce as teeth in a hen. I only know of 3 copies, and I've got one, there's somebody in this room has got one, and there's another copy up in Scotland. They're rarer than brain-faced Ruperts, I would say, if you've ever heard of a brain-faced Rupert. Anyway, talking of brain-faced Ruperts, which we weren't, let's just see where else I was going before I got carried away. I was talking here about original artwork on Mary Tortell's. It's not difficult to find. If you go to a gallery up in London called Chris Beatles, he's cornered the market on most of the Tortell stores that have ever come up in auction. And for about £1,200 you can buy a Mary Tortell panel. They should be cheaper than that. I mean, I think they're about £800. If you go to Beatles gallery, I mean, he's a art dealer for the Autoloy and everything else. And people who've made vast sums of money on the stock market and whatever, and they're quite happy to pay vast sums of money for things. But he does have a considerable quantity of Tortell stories. They're not as rare panels, Mary Tortell panels, are not as rare as people might think. I mean, in the Duke's auction, I think there were about 3 or 4 complete stories of about 50 panels. So you can think there's 200 panels out there. If he's charging, you pay a lot of money for them. If he's charging, £1,000 a panel, or whatever it is, you can see he's got a premise up in London, not too far from Buck House. What else have I got here? Talking about original artwork, Caroline has a wonderful selection of her house of Alfred's artwork, and it's an exhibition as well worth seeing. I've seen it 2 or 3 times and would love to see it a 4th time. It covers the period before he got involved in Rupert, and some nice covers, potential covers, all in colour, and it's a treat to see. And fortunately, Caroline and Alan have decided to make sure that it will remain, as a collection, and I think it's going to the Bodleian, is it? So it goes to the Bodleian, and in Oxford, and I told Caroline, if it goes there, don't let them just stick it in the cellar so nobody can see it. Make sure it's exhibited at least once a year, so that people who want to see it get a chance to do it. Because quite often these places take it on board. First thing that happens is it goes straight down in their books, and it's never seen the light of day again. Anyway, Bestall artwork does turn up, as you've just seen. The piece that Rogers suddenly sorted out. And I can tell you that a number of his newspaper pen and ink episodes have appeared on the market in the past, and they've sold between sort of £350 to £600 an episode, which is, par for the course. I think people nicked them at different times or donated them at different times, and they have appeared, and the price obviously reflects on what the image contains. If it's got Rupert and Chums, it'll be up there, and if it's just a mundane scene, it'll come down. Chris Beatles, of course, of great fame, did have 6 annual covers that he sold off in one of these display exhibitions or something or other. If you got the catalogue, you could rush and ring him up and say, can I have number 1948 Rupert Bear cover? And he would say, sorry, it's sold. Yeah, they all sold before they got on the wall. But they sold from around £8,000 per cover, which is, to my way of thinking, quite cheap for the quality of work that you've got there.
When was that?
Oh, I don't know, when was it? It was 4, 5, 6 years ago. Yeah, I've got a catalogue somewhere. People usually get hold of these things, and who has the ownership of them, I don't really know. Really, I mean, people nick them and then they disappear, and newspapers or the owners are quite often not that bothered, because most artwork, when it is produced for an end or something like that, in papers or what have you, once the printer has copied it to go in the book, they have no further use for it. It usually gets slung away, and in fact the Frog Song end paper was rescued by Doris Campbell because that had gone to Florence Studios, and they put it in their drawer. When the drawer gets filled, they take it down and stick it in the incinerator, and she rescued it just before it went in the incinerator. So Alfred's frog song pen paper was saved from destruction by Doris Campbell, who, strangely enough, was involved in Rupert. John Harold artwork does appear occasionally, and his newspaper episodes fetch £150, £200. I haven't seen one on sale recently, but that's the sort of price I would probably put on them if I was asked. But I haven't seen any that have appeared recently. I mean, he does have episodes, but he doesn't throw them on the market. So he might have some at the book signing day when he comes along. I might ask him to bring some along. So if you come into that, you might get the opportunity to buy one. Anyway, that's artwork, covers artwork really. Next on my list, so I typed it all out so I wouldn't be quite so silly as I normally look.
It's a good job you did, John.
It's, well, I'm never going to find this. I mean, Julie Dugard will tell you there's lots of Dutch ephemera as well as books. They were very, very good. I mean, the Dutch were very commercial in the 30s, doing jigsaws and you name it, they did board games and, you know, I mean, they were very, very thorough with the things they did, and they milked it to death. I mean, you can get biscuit tins because they did Rupert Bear biscuits and things like that, and I've had the biscuit tins. I even got off of one of the panels that come out of the factory where they used to make the biscuits, and I thought, I don't really want that in my bookcase, so I declined it. But all the sorts of ephemeras come out at different times, and as I say, the books are relatively easy to find, the jigsaws are not so easy to find, and the other thing I'm looking for, which I'll show you later when I finally find it in the bottom of the bag, is, I'll put it here, is an unusual item. It's probably the smallest Rupert badge you'll ever see, and it's so small I've lost it. It's in there somewhere. Oh, the next thing I've got is something else you might be interested to see. If I can, God, I bought too much stuff, it's my problem. Let me have a look, just look at that. I should have got it all out. I got here a bit earlier, I could have laid it all out and sorted it all out. And I didn't organise it. I had my lunch, so I didn't get a chance. It's in here somewhere. Come here, where are you? Speak to me. It's decided to take a walk. Like a lot of things. Will it turn up? Will it appear? Yeah. It's one of those things I'm going to find in a minute. So, oh, there it is. Anyway, we'll leave that for the time being. When it turns up, I will regale you with it. What else have I got here? Oh yes. There's not much in the way of other foreign Rupert appearing in other countries. Japan's done some, and the only other thing I'm really aware of is Rupert appearing as Rucus in, I believe, Portugal. And I've only ever seen the one book, and that came to me when I bought the Rupert Index copyright from Bill Loss. And it was something he found, and he said, oh, here's another early one. And I thought there'd be thousands of them out there, but I can't find them.
I've been looking for 40 years.
Well, it's been around a bit. It says Portugal on here, #1.
Wasn't it in, can I discuss, illustrated in one of the very early editions of Pocket Magazine Collector?
Probably, because I probably supplied them with the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where they got it from.
Yeah.
Because I wrote the article.
I've never seen it anywhere else.
No, I'm just saying, I haven't seen any other editions or copies of it. This is #1, and it's interesting because it's another country apart from Holland who produced items. So let's see what else we got. We covered Portugal, Dutch ephemera, artwork. So getting back to artwork. Of course, QB artwork turns up sometimes, but very seldom. There was some stuff in Duke's
I own that one, John. I own that collection.
Yes, here comes the man who's bought it, the man who bought it at Duke's auction.
I almost brought it along. Excuse me. I almost brought it along actually for John to tell us all about it, but it's too common for John.
There were 28 frames, 7 panels, and they sold for 650 quid in auction. The Daily Express still have some of them as well at the present time, but QB did do private commissions for people. And if you want a piece of scarce artwork, he is probably one of the more difficult ones to find, because not much of his other artwork for the Express escaped. Let's have a look. All the things here I was going to bring, I couldn't bloody find, which didn't help at all. The next interesting thing is proof copies of things. When book publishers are publishing something, before they go into print, the company or whoever it is who's sorting out the whatever it is, a book or a magazine or something like that, will want to see a proof copy of what's going to be produced to make sure it's not printed upside down or in the wrong colours and fits on the page right and everything else. And you will need to approve a proof before it then goes into full-time publication. And I think Caroline has a proof here somewhere of a book that people are aware of that is a bit notorious, because it's called The Brain-Faced Rupert. People spend vast sums of money on getting copies. I think it came up in the quiz last night that the ones in Duke's auction cost £22,000 and £23,000 respectively, and you see the odd person beaming away there holding their copy, thinking, look what I've got, it's the same as a white-faced Rupert, but he's got a brown face and everything else in it is exactly the same. And it looks like that. Well, yours, Caroline, snap! My goodness, me, is there more than one around? Oh my goodness. They're as common as flies on the The thing is, Caroline's is genuine and this is a forgery. Well, I won't tell you that, because it's gone on restored at £22,000 if you want it. But they were issued there were a dozen copies done, I believe, or less, around that sort of figure. And they were sent to the Express for distribution, obviously, to various people who would have a say in it, which would be the Rupert editor, Alfred, of course. And one or two appeared to go further up the chain to people who didn't even know what they were bloody well looking at. And that was where the problem occurred, because somebody high up in the Express decided that Rupert should have a white face. And of course, the people underneath him weren't prepared to tell him no. If he said he had a white face, he had a white face. And that was it. And consequently, it was altered for the trade publication, which rather upset Alfred quite understandably, because he'd been a qualified artist or RA and everything else. You don't mess with people's artwork. And he was so indignant about it, of course, he refused to do any further covers. And QB carried on after that. I mean, Alfred did do other work for the annual, but he was rather lipped about it, understandably. And mind you, he was about 70 at the time, wasn't he? About 80 at the time.
I date on to 73.
He was 73 when that was done.
This is 1973.
Yeah, but
born
how
in
old?
1892.
So he was.
Well, you probably haven't had his birthday. It's about 80.
He was about 80, so he should, you know, I mean, he had a good reason for retiring, I think. I don't blame him. I mean, if I get on to 80, I'm going to retire.
Before we go on, John, I just want to ask in the audience, you put your hands up, who hasn't actually seen an original brown face annual in face to face? Yeah, that's why I was so pleased that Caroline could bring it out for so long. So thank you, Caroline. Before I forget to thank you.
Yeah, I've handled 6 in my time. I've handled Caroline because she was kind enough to show it to me when I visited her exhibition. Duke's asked me to verify the 2 they had, not that it really needed much verification, because the source was impeccable, Freddie Chaplin's collection. I've handled the one that Alfred signed for Laurel Clark, which I think a chap called Hamer, have you heard of him? Mr. Hamer? Not Hammer, Hamer.
You see, all the
He auctioned one, he auctioned the Laurel Clark collection, and there was a 73 annual. I don't think it made the sort of 22,000 range, in fact I know it didn't. But that was one of the early ones that came. And where they've all gone now, I don't know. I know some are abroad, but they are not easy things to find.
Is it known where that there are actually 12?
Caroline,
I've always understood there were 12. May I just say that the reason Rupert's face was changed was because children always used to write into the Daily Express if Alfred got, for instance, the traffic lights changing colour, they'd always write letters and point these things out. And children used to write into the Daily Express and say, why does Rupert have a brown face, hands and feet on the cover, but he's white inside? So they thought they'd change it.
there you are.
Are you able to say, John, how you tell the difference between the forgeries?
No, I'm going to stay the authority on it, and I'm not going to reveal it. If somebody wants to know if they got a brown face Rupert, they can offer it in front of me, and I will tell them whether it's a forgery or not. I'm not going to give away my secrets to anybody and everybody, but I mean there is a simple way of telling it, and you know, knowledge is power.
Go with the followers. Go with the followers and find out nothing wrong with it.
So if you've got one, I'm quite happy to do it for a fee. I'll authenticate it or not.
Is that a percentage fee, John?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing I was looking for earlier on and couldn't find in my filing system has now materialised. So we will take a step back to the Dutch Rupert. And here we are, here it is. It's the smallest Rupert badge I've ever seen. It's silver, I think. It's a Dutch one because the colour is all the Dutch related. It came to me through various channels because people know I'm interested in Rupert. And the colour, you know, I mean, he's got sort of a browny, bluey top. The eyes are not so good. It's a rather rare item. I mean, I haven't studied it closely recently, but you can't have too many of them, and I would imagine a lot of them have disappeared over the period of time. But there it is. That was one of the things I was going to show you. And the other one, we talked about unusual ephemera that the Dutch used to do. And one of the things they did were wall plaques, brass wall plaques. Very unusual. To my knowledge, there's 4 or 5 of them. I think I've got 4 or 5 maybe, I don't know, hanging on my wall somewhere, covering up the cracks and collecting cobwebs. But they are rather nice. They're from the 1930s. They're pressed brass plate on a card back in, and they seldom turn up. I mean, it's Rupert Bear. You've probably heard of him, part of the thing. Anyway, there he is with his chums going off on a hike together. Probably taken from one of the Rupert stories. Looks a bit familiar. Anyway, that was one of the items I was going to show you, and I mean, they're not easy things to find, and they can be quite expensive. I'm just trying to see what I'm selling that one for. If you come on my stall, I'll think of a figure. If you look wealthy, you might be able to buy it. Anyway, talking on proofs and everything else, the things that Express used to get, and I got loads of at different times. They used to get sent. They used to get sent proofs of in papers for approval, and I need to find it. Yeah, I mean things like that. This is an unusual one. It's interesting because it's a. I think cover. Somebody will tell you what cover it is.
That's 1969.
Well, there you go, you see, there's an expert sitting on the panel here. And the interesting thing is that it's got Rupert with his face whitened out with snowflake or something or other. I don't know whether they were going to have another go at doing a white-faced Rupert and see what it looked like. But that's as it arrived to me. I mean, that's how it normally appears.
Yes.
With the brain face thing. And these things turn up, or they have done, a lot was the covers were done as proofs to send into the newspaper for approval, because they were done by a different printing firm to the body of the book. And the body of the book was usually sent to them just in brown, plain covers. So this is the 1951 ad. I mean, I've hung on to it because basically, I think, oh yeah, it just notes on there, from probably the publisher, that there were 1 million copies done, which is a bit more than Egmont produced these days, I think, or maybe a few.
Just hold down a little bit, John.
Sorry?
Just hold it down a little bit for the camera. Down a bit.
Down a bit, up a bit.
Down that way, that's it. Yeah, perfect, thank you.
But that was written on there by the Express, or people in the Express. And this, in fact, is just, this is a, let's have a look. Because at that time there were different printers being used. And this, in fact, is a Robinson one. And similarly, it says, talking while he's trying to think, there's another one here, the 1953. Yeah, I know, but I've got bad eyesight. I can't see a bloody thing. Oh, that's the screen, is it?
Yeah, that's the screen.
Thank you very much.
The camera's a little thing, I don't see that.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I can't see that. Yeah, you want to keep your eye out. Anyway, this one says it was printed in May to August 1953, and 650,000 copies were being printed. Again, a few more than Egmont produced these days. I think they do 65, not 1,000. And this one again is printed by Robinson. But people were taking the trouble to write on the plain covers that they came in to say what the print run was, which is quite interesting. For archivists like myself. And another thing I got from, because I bought a lot of stuff at the Duke's auction, because it contained things I wanted, and I ended up with things I didn't really want at the time. I wasn't buying it for that. But here's an interesting item. It's the Adventure Series number 49. I mean, not a rarity in itself, but quite a difficult thing to find. But in somebody has annotated inside details of who was involved in the particular artwork and the couplets. I mean, that says on the back there, illustration by Enid Ash. It says on the front, cover illustration by Enid Ash. Inside it says, half title and illustrations by Miss Ash, text by Mrs. Fraser. That was Alfred's friend's wife, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, there was. Yes, there was.
And it says story staff contributions, so that way they can blame anybody for anything that's wrong, I suppose. But it's interesting that all the way through, where the stories are and the puzzles are, they give credit for it. I mean, you can tell it's a proof because the things are only printed on one side, the other side's blank, so it's not a double-sided image. And similarly, I've got a 1951 here, cover design by Miss Ash. They worked her to death, didn't they? Illustrations by Miss Ash. And it's much the same thing, but it does give credit for who was involved in doing what, which to an archivist like myself is quite fascinating and interesting. Anyway, they were in Chaplin's archive, and I find them quite interesting and fascinating. I hope you do as well. You're not falling asleep yet, have you? No? If I'm boring you, just say so.
I understand why John Swan said no one knows Bobby. we couldn't touch you, John, so on this.
Another thing which is interesting to me was some chap in Canada wrote to me 4 or 5 years ago saying, was I aware of special editions of annuals? I said, no. Anyway, he said, well, I've got some hard-covered versions, he said, of, I don't know what years they were now, I couldn't find his letter, my filing system is not the best, but otherwise I brought it along, but I think they were early 50s, And he said they're banged up, he said, and they've got gold images and gold titles on them. And here's an example. Now, this is a hard-covered book. Inside it's exactly the same, but on the front you've got a Rupert, and on the back you've got Rupert Book in gold. And the speculation is, I mean, the inside is exactly the same as an ordinary book, but it is hard-covered. And the speculation is that they actually were done for executives and that sort of thing to give away to kids at Christmas, blah, blah, that sort of thing. They just banged up probably a few dozen copies or something like that, and they were given away to salesmen or people who did quite well. And that was one he hadn't got, that I found, which was rather nice. And then later on, I was looking through one of the international auction sites, and there's a firm you might have heard of called Stellar Books, who are the thanks of all knowledge and know nothing. And they had on there, they said, oh, we've got a book here. I've still got the description inside. It's been used and it's inscribed by somebody. And it says 1950, rebanged with all faults. Boom, and it's got a bit of rubbish in it as well, you know, somebody's had a scribble in it as well. But it's the 1950 annual, and their wording is still inside. Well, that's what they put in there. Yeah, they do. Yeah. Well, it's still a book for you. And I knew what it was straight away, so I had to pay the princely sum of about £13.50, I think. And on the front, it's got 50-51. It says there, all in gold, embossed. They didn't have a clue what they got. It was a bit mucky and a bit dirty. I had to spend a bit of time cleaning it up. The value of them, I mean, if you're going to put a value on them, what are they worth? I don't know. A few £100 each? You know, I mean, it depends how Anaraki you are if you want to collect things like that. But the old kiddie in Canada's got some. I've got two, and no more have come my way. So perhaps we've cornered the market. I don't know. See what else is in the box in your light. Oh my goodness me, I can't show you that. Oh my word. We get to the end, don't worry, you can sleep in a minute. Now what we have here is an attractive copy. You'll probably find, I'll point you at an attractive copy of a 1951 annual. Oh, Caroline. What year is it? 51. Good. Nice to know you. Nice to know you're still with me.
Oh, that's 1952 anyway.
You're confusing. Well, we'll have a guess on it. Doesn't really matter too much. It's not the point I'm trying to make. One day on my door there was a knock. I think it might have been a phone call first. And a lady said, I've got some Rupert annuals I want to get rid of. Oh yeah, they all tell me that. And she said they were given to me by my godfather. I said, who was that? She said, Mr. A.E.B. Bestall. He used to do, Alfred sent out quite a few annuals to different people, relatives and things like that. He was very good like that, and he'd sign them and send them off to the recipients. And this one is interesting in that it is signed to Rose and Philippa, with love from Uncle Aki. Who's Uncle Aki, you might say? Uncle Aki was the name, the nickname that Alfred, in the First World War, used by his old wartime friends. So obviously Rose and Carol and Philippa were relatives of the father who Alfred knew during the wartime. But if you read that somewhere and didn't know the history behind it, you think, who's Aki? Aki was a nickname that Alfred used to people from wartime, and I was quite pleased to get that. I mean, not the state of the annual. I mean, you can find some nice copies of annuals like that on Charles's store if you want them that bad.
Thank you. you, John.
But that was interesting in as much that he did quite a few personal dedications and everything else. And talking of that, before I get on to the next item, which is also dedication, he's very good at signing things for people. Lots of people went to Newark and they were all thrusting annuals in front of him, and he was very good, he was signing them. But what he did do, he signed them and noted the year that he had signed it. If you get an Alfred Bestall signature on an annual and it's not dated, it means that he signed it at the time the annual was published. If you've got one and it's got 1973 on it, which is the one you see so often, it's because it was thrust under his nose at Newark, and he signed it because it was 1973, it was the first year. So if ever you come across a Bestall sign, there's plenty of them out there. I mean, they're not rare, but he will always put the date on there if it's an annual that he signed sometime after it actually appeared. But occasionally you get things to, you've just seen one, to family members and that sort of thing, and another one that is rather well loved. You probably know Edward Bell.
He was the godson, Edward Bell.
There you go.
He didn't have any other goddaughters.
No.
Husband, but
But Edward Bell was,
there were two godsons, and Edward Bell was one of them.
well, this was Edward Bell's annual. And what he's done, you might not be able to see it, it says, to Edward with love, Uncle Fred, and there's a Rupert waving away there.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Edward did look after his annuals as well as I might have liked him to, but it's quite nice and novel that it still exists, and you've got a bit of history, as Caroline says, it was one of Alfred's only godsons, so...
Two godsons.
Oh, two godsons.
Two godsons.
I'm looking now for the signed annual for the other one. To make the setup.
I think, John, that we're doing just about running out of time.
Well, I've got one more thing to do, which I will do, with your permission.
Of course, you can.
And talking on the subject of signed things, if they are to people he was involved with or knew personally, it adds a premium value, if we're going to talk mercenary things like money, to the value of the item. And what I have here, and I chased it around through 3 dealers to get hold of it, paid a bloody fortune, but that's how life goes. And this one is a copy of Spanish goldfish, which you've probably heard of and seen and are well aware of. But this says to Muriel with best wishes from AEB, dated the 1st of the 1st, 1935. And Muriel was his housekeeper. So to get something that is personalised to somebody he knew is quite a little gem. And it would, rather than it just be signed to nobody, to Muriel, his housekeeper, and it's known, would double the value of that book. Anyway, I think that's about it. My bag is empty. The genius have jumped out the bottle. I've got one thing in here, which I don't know what it is. Oh, I know what it is. Just quickly, briefly, Mary Tortel. Mary Tortel's pictures were always drawn by Herbert and inspired by Herbert. And he did them on tissue paper, did the rhyming couplets, drew a rough sketch, and she did the rest. And that's how they were appeared when Mary Tortel got them, just on a cheap bit of old cellophane. Or cooking paper, I don't know. But there's an example of one that he did, and the picture, it's an interesting one, that it was a story that only had one episode, Rupert's Christmas Eve, and it's a bit of a novelty because of that, I suppose. Anyway, there you are, ladies and gentlemen. If you're not going to bring things along to show me to talk about, I'll have to bring my own things.
Well, thank you, John. I'm sat in awe, actually. Fantastic items. I've one question, actually. I keep thinking about, and not just today. What happens to all of your? You must have the most rarest items, and what are you going to do with it? Ultimately?
I'm going to do what Alfred said, stick them on a bonfire.
No, you mustn't do that.
That's what he said to you, wasn't it?
Yes,
Stick
but I
it on.
didn't do it.
Well, he said it to you, I'll probably end up doing it. I don't know, I'd probably just get him a tip, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, Rupert is dying, whether you like it or not. He's not going to last too much longer. He's going to go the way of Teddy Tell. Even if you hope that he's going to do something else, it will be people like us nostalgically it'll be keeping the game alive. There's no new young people coming through, so they won't want copies of it, so I'll stick it in the Bodleian Library with Caroline stuff.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I think let's all thank both Caroline and John for a fantastic, was it half an hour, 45 minutes of interesting articles, which probably most of us haven't ever seen before, and probably never see again. So thank you, John, thank you, Caroline.